Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable stories of the most wanted people in history. Not the sweetened legends, not the noble fairy tales, but the names that rattled kingdoms and haunted empires. The names whispered in candlelit taverns, scratched into royal decrees, nailed onto wooden doors on wanted posters that promised gold for their heads. These were the people history tried to bury but couldn't. They were too loud, too ruthless, too unforgettable to vanish. The medieval world was not gentle. It was a place where survival itself was rebellion. Step into a street of that age, and you wouldn't smell perfume or bread. You'd smell sweat, rot, horses and blood. You'd hear the clang of steel, the cries of beggars, the chants of priests warning of hellfire. You'd see gallows in the town square, a reminder that the wrong word could cost you your neck. And in the shadows of all this, certain figures rose, not by kindness, not by virtue, but by force. They were wanted not just by kings and priests, but by history itself. Before we dive in, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and stay with me until the very end. Because hidden inside all of these stories is a single thread, a truth that ties them together. If you catch it, if you can see what connects them all, drop it in the comments. I want to know who among you can piece together the hidden reality. Now think about this. What does it mean to be most wanted in the Middle Ages? Today it means your face on a poster, your name on a police list. Back then, it meant something darker. It meant kings woke up sweating in the night with your name in their head. It meant priests denounced you from the pulpit. It meant peasants whispered your story as they huddled around fires, wondering if you were a demon, a savior, or both. Some were rebels who refused to kneel. Some were rulers so ambitious that the world itself bent under their will. Some were so cruel that death followed them like a shadow. But all of them broke the rules of their time, and for that, they were marked. Most wanted. Imagine the fear of a Scottish king as he heard the name William Wallace carried on the wind, a rebel who would rather be torn apart than bow to England. Imagine a court trembling as a teenage girl from France claimed voices from heaven told her to lead armies. Joan of Arc, a farmer's daughter who terrified generals. Picture the cold forests of Transylvania, where Vlad the Impaler raised forests of stakes, decorating the land with corpses, until even the Ottomans turned back in horror. These are not bedtime stories. These are the blood-soaked legends that survived, because their enemies couldn't erase them. But let's not fool ourselves. Wanted didn't always mean righteous. It didn't always mean fighting for freedom. Sometimes it meant fighting for nothing but the taste of power. Sometimes it meant burning cities, slaughtering innocents, ruling by fear so absolute that even centuries later, their names sting. Power in the Middle Ages wasn't polite. It wasn't clean. It was raw, naked, and brutal. Picture yourself in that world. You walk into a tavern, the smell of ale and smoke choking the air. At the corner table, a bard whispers a tale of a warrior whose enemies begged for mercy. In the back, a soldier mutters about a king who murdered his own son. At another table, a priest warns of the girl who hears voices from God. Everyone leans in, everyone listens, because these names, the most wanted, are more than gossip. They are warnings. They are proof that even in a world ruled by iron and faith, chaos can still break through. And here's the truth. History remembers them not because they were good or bad, but because they were impossible to ignore. You may love them, you may hate them, but you cannot erase them. They are stitched into the fabric of our world. From the frozen steppes of Mongolia, where a starving boy became the punishment of God, to the heart of Rome, where daggers found their way into the back of a dictator, to the thrones of Russia, where paranoia burned hotter than fire, to the fields of Europe, where emperors dreamed of being Caesar reborn. Tonight we're going to walk that road together. Each one of these figures carried something in common. They refused to accept the world as it was given to them. They demanded more, sometimes freedom, sometimes glory, sometimes terror. But all of them left behind something that outlived them. Scars in the memory of humanity. And let me remind you again, stick with me through this journey. Don't skip, don't jump, because somewhere between these stories lies the answer to a question that still matters. Why does power always come bathed in blood? If you catch it, if you understand it, drop it in the comments. Let's see how many of you can spot the hidden truth. So, settle in. This isn't the neat, polite history they feed you in school. This is the raw side, the outlaw side, the side where crowns are won in rivers of blood, and names survive not because they were loved, but because they were feared. Tonight, we begin. And we begin with a boy, abandoned in the cold, betrayed by his own people, left to starve. A boy who would grow into the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen. His enemies called him a monster. His people called him a father. History calls him Genghis Khan. He came into the world as Temujin, a child no one expected to live past his first winter. The winds of the Mongolian steppes cut sharper than blades, and the boy was born into a clan where loyalty lasted only until the next betrayal. His father, a tribal chief, was poisoned by enemies when Temujin was just a boy, leaving his family weak and leaderless. And weakness on the steppe was a death sentence. The clan abandoned them, cast them out as useless mouths to feed. Temujin, his mother, and his siblings scavenged roots, dug for wild onions, hunted rats and fish with bare hands. Hunger carved itself into his bones. Imagine being 9 years old and knowing your father's killers were still out there, laughing over their victory, while your own kin treated you like trash. Temujin learned early that pity was poison and survival came only to those who fought for it. As he grew, fate tested him again. Rival tribes captured him, chained him, humiliated him, forced him to wear a wooden collar that marked him as nothing but a slave. Most boys would have been broken. Temujin escaped. He waited for the right night, killed his guard, and fled into the darkness of the steppe. That escape hardened him, burned a lesson into his soul. If you want to survive, you cannot simply endure. You must strike back. The Mongols were not a nation then. They were scattered tribes, bound by fragile alliances and endless feuds. One family insult lasted for generations. One theft could lead to decades of revenge killings. They raided, fought, betrayed each other without end. Temujin saw what others could not, that this chaos was weakness. If the tribes could be united, the world itself would have no defense against them. Step by step, he began to gather followers. He demanded loyalty not to bloodlines or tradition, but to himself. That was revolutionary. On the steppe, family and ancestry were everything, but Temujin broke the rules. He rewarded men for bravery, punished them for cowardice, and ignored their clan names. A common herder could rise to command thousands if he proved himself. A noble could be executed like any other if he betrayed trust. His message was simple. In my army, merit matters, nothing else. It worked. His charisma was fire, his ruthlessness steel. Men who joined him swore they would follow him to hell itself, and those who opposed him discovered he meant what he said when he promised annihilation. By 1206, the impossible had happened. At a great council, the tribes declared him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. In that moment, the steppe, long fractured, stood united under one man. And when the tribes stopped fighting each other, they turned outward. The rest of the world would never be the same. The Mongol army that followed him was unlike any force seen before. They lived on horseback, their lives fused with their steeds. Each warrior carried several bows, dozens of arrows, and could hit targets at full gallop. They could cover 100 miles a day, surviving on dried meat and fermented milk, even drinking horse blood when food and water ran dry. Their mobility was unmatched, their endurance terrifying. Against them, knights in heavy armor were clumsy statues, foot soldiers were lambs waiting for slaughter, and Genghis used them with brilliance. He perfected the art of the feigned retreat. His men would pretend to flee in panic, luring enemies into open ground, only to surround and obliterate them. He recruited Chinese engineers to build siege weapons, Persian administrators to manage cities, Muslim scholars to record laws. He was not afraid to learn from his enemies. He absorbed their knowledge and used it against them. When he set his sights on the Khwarezm Empire, it was one of the richest kingdoms in the world. But when its ruler murdered Genghis Khan's envoys, he signed his empire's death warrant. The Mongols descended with fire and steel. City after city fell. Bukhara, Samarkand, jewels of Islamic civilization, reduced to ruins. At Nishapur, after one of his commanders was killed, Genghis ordered the entire city put to the sword. Men, women, children, all slaughtered. Some chronicles claim 200,000 died, others say more. In the ruins, piles of skulls rose like monuments, and yet, alongside this brutality, he built. He created the yasa, a code of law that bound his people. Theft was punished harshly. Kidnapping women was outlawed. Hunting during breeding season was forbidden to preserve wildlife. The laws were brutal, but they created order across lands that had known only chaos. Trade flourished under his rule. Merchants, once preyed upon by bandits, now traveled safely across thousands of miles. The Silk Road became the veins of his empire, carrying not only goods but ideas, inventions, and yes, plagues. Gunpowder traveled west, mathematics traveled east. Even the Black Death, centuries later, would follow routes first made safe under Mongol rule. This was the paradox of Genghis Khan, the destroyer who also built, the monster who also connected the world. He slaughtered millions, but he also created the first real system of international trade. He burned cities, but he also declared religious freedom, allowing Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and shamans to worship as they pleased. He was ruthless, but he was fair in his own savage way, and he never forgot betrayal. When the Tangut kingdom refused to support him after swearing loyalty, he turned his armies against them. He was relentless. Mercy was rare, and once given, never given twice. There is a story of him addressing the conquered people of Bukhara. He stood in their great mosque and told them plainly, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Imagine hearing those words, your city burning, your loved ones dead, the conqueror himself standing before you claiming to be divine wrath. Whether or not he believed it, those who survived never forgot it. But despite his victories, he was not invincible. He was wounded in battles, thrown from his horse, nearly killed more than once. His death in 1227 remains a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse. Some say he was mortally wounded in battle. Some whisper he was killed by a Tangut princess, who concealed a weapon and struck him in his tent. His burial was hidden in secrecy. According to legend, his funeral escort killed everyone they encountered to keep the grave's location secret. Some say rivers were diverted to conceal it forever. No one has ever found it. Even in death, he refused to be conquered. His empire passed to his sons and grandsons. They expanded it further, into Russia, the Middle East, and deep into China. Kublai Khan, his grandson, would rule as Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous empire in history, covering nearly a quarter of the world's population. But without Genghis's iron hand, it fractured. Rivalries tore it apart, and though his descendants remained powerful, none matched his sheer will, and yet his legacy endures. Nearly 1 in every 200 men alive today carries his genetic marker. His bloodline flows in millions of veins across the earth. He is not just a figure of history, he is written in our DNA. So, what was he? A savage killer? A visionary leader? A monster? A genius? Perhaps he was all of them at once. Perhaps that is why his name still echoes. Think of the journey. A boy abandoned in the cold, enslaved, hunted, betrayed, who rose to unite the tribes, to forge an empire, to terrify the world. He turned prey into predator, weakness into domination. His story is proof of a brutal truth. History does not belong to the meek. It belongs to those willing to take it with fire and blood. And while the Mongol storm swept across the east, the west was about to face a terror of its own. A rider from the plains who made Rome itself tremble, who demanded gold as the price of peace, who left scorched earth wherever his horses passed. They called him the Scourge of God. His name was Attila. He came from the wild heart of the steppes, where the horizon stretched forever and the wind carried only the sound of hooves. His people, the Huns, were nomads, fierce riders hardened by hunger and endless war. To the Romans, they were monsters, demons on horseback, men who seemed more beast than human. And at the head of this storm rode one man whose very name became terror, Attila. To his enemies, he was the Scourge of God. No one knows for sure where Attila was born, but by the time he rose to power in the 5th century, the world was already afraid of the Huns. They struck from nowhere, burned everything in their path, then vanished before any army could catch them. But under Attila, they became more than raiders. They became an empire in motion, bound not by walls or cities, but by the will of a single leader. Attila was not handsome, not tall, not the kind of man who dazzled a court. Ancient writers describe him as short, broad-chested, with a flat nose, a thin beard, and piercing eyes that burned with a cold, calculating fire. He didn't need beauty. He had fear, and fear was more powerful than any crown. At first, Attila ruled alongside his brother Bleda. Together, they struck deals with the Eastern Roman Empire, demanding gold in exchange for peace. Rome paid, but peace with the Huns was like buying time from a storm, temporary, fragile, always ending in destruction. After a few years, Bleda conveniently died. Some say Attila had him killed. Others say it was an accident. Whatever the truth, from then on, Attila ruled alone. He built his power not just through raids, but through strategy. He understood the psychology of Rome. He knew they feared him, and he used that fear as a weapon. He sent envoys demanding gold, livestock, even Roman princesses as brides. And Rome, trembling, often gave in. He didn't need to conquer the city to humiliate it. He made its emperors beg. But Attila's ambition was too great for tribute alone. In 447, he launched one of his most devastating campaigns, tearing through the Balkans, leaving cities burned, villages erased. Survivors fled in all directions, carrying tales of horror. Priests said he was sent by God to punish sinners. Peasants swore he was the devil's spawn. To his own people, he was the hand of destiny. Attila did not spare. Where resistance was strong, he turned it into ash. Where submission came quickly, he allowed life. But even then, his mercy felt more like mockery. He had no interest in building monuments or ruling cities. His empire was in the saddle, moving, consuming, unstoppable. In 451, he turned west, leading his armies into Gaul. The Roman Empire was weak, fractured, a shadow of its former glory. But here at last, Attila met his match. On the Catalonian plains, his forces clashed with a coalition of Romans and Visigoths. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the ancient world. Tens of thousands died. Attila's horsemen struck like thunder, but the coalition held. For the first time, the scourge of God was checked. He withdrew, not defeated entirely, but denied his greatest prize, the destruction of Rome itself. Yet he was not finished. The very next year, Attila invaded Italy. His armies swept through the north, cities falling one by one. The Eternal City seemed doomed, but then something strange happened. As Attila advanced toward Rome, he was met not by legions, but by a man in robes, Pope Leo I. No one knows exactly what was said in their meeting, but legend claims the Pope warned Attila of divine wrath should he sack the city. Whatever the truth, Attila turned his armies back. Rome was spared. Some say it was sickness in his camp. Some say famine. Others whisper that even the scourge of God could feel fear when God himself was invoked. Attila returned to his stronghold in the Hungarian plains, still unbeaten, still feared across the world. He had bent empires, drained treasuries, burned cities, and carved his name into the nightmares of Europe. And then, suddenly, he was gone. In 453, on the night of his wedding to a young bride, Attila drank deeply, celebrated wildly, and went to bed. By morning, he was dead. Some said he choked on his own blood from a nosebleed. Others swore the bride killed him in his sleep. Still others claimed it was divine punishment, the hand of God striking down his scourge. His men mourned him with a grief that shook the steppes. According to legend, they buried him in secret, laying him in a coffin of gold, silver, and iron, then diverted a river to cover his grave. The soldiers who carried out the burial were all killed, so no one could ever reveal the site. Like Genghis centuries later, Attila vanished into mystery, but his shadow never left. To this day, his name carries a sting. He was not a builder like Caesar, not a lawgiver like Genghis, not a dreamer like Napoleon. He was destruction itself, raw and unchained, a living reminder that sometimes history is shaped not by creation, but by fire. Rome survived him, but it never forgot him. Priests would still whisper of the scourge of God, the man who rode out of the steppes and brought empires to their knees. And perhaps that is fitting, because in the end, Attila was not meant to build. He was meant to burn, and as his legend faded into memory, another figure would rise in Rome itself. A man who wanted not to destroy the empire, but to control it. A man whose ambition would carry him from the battlefields of Gaul to the Senate itself. His name was Julius Caesar. He was not born to be ordinary. Gaius Julius Caesar came into the world in 100 BCE, in a Rome that was already restless, a republic drowning in corruption, ambition, and blood. He was from a noble family, but not the richest, not the most powerful. Still, his name carried weight, and Caesar understood early that names, when sharpened by ambition, could cut deeper than swords. As a young man, he faced danger that could have ended his story before it began. When the dictator Sulla came to power and ordered the execution of his enemies, Caesar's name appeared on the list. He should have been dead before his 20s, but fortune smiled on him. Powerful relatives intervened, and Sulla reluctantly spared him. As the story goes, Sulla warned his followers, "In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. In other words, this boy had the potential to be more dangerous than any rival. The warning would prove prophetic. Caesar cut his teeth in war, serving as a soldier and earning distinction for bravery. But it was not just on the battlefield that he learned. He traveled, he studied rhetoric, and his silver tongue became as sharp as his blade. He understood that power was not only taken with armies, it was won with words, with spectacle, with charm. Rome was a theatre, and Caesar was learning to be its star. Debt chained him early. He borrowed heavily to fund his political career, throwing games, spectacles, and banquets that dazzled the Roman people. He knew that Rome loved bread and circuses, and he gave them both. His debt soared, but so did his popularity. He was climbing, and nothing would stop him. His military genius found its stage in Gaul. Sent to govern and fight in the wild lands beyond the Alps, Caesar transformed the posting into legend. For nearly a decade, he waged relentless campaigns, crushing tribe after tribe, subduing an entire region. He wrote his own commentaries on these wars, sending them back to Rome. Not dry reports, but vivid accounts of his victories, designed to make him a hero in the eyes of the people. He was both general and propagandist, and it worked. Rome adored him. His soldiers adored him even more. They called him a master of loyalty. He marched with his men, shared their hardships, rewarded them with gold and glory. He turned common soldiers into fanatics, willing to follow him anywhere. And that bond would be his greatest weapon. But success breeds fear. Caesar's growing power alarmed Rome's elite. The Senate, stuffed with men who valued their own influence, saw him as a threat. His rival, Pompey, once his ally in the so-called First Triumvirate, turned against him. Tension rose. And then came the order that would change history. The Senate demanded Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. He had a choice: obey and fade into irrelevance, or defy the Senate, risk civil war and seize power. On a cold January night in 49 BCE, Caesar stood before the Rubicon River, the border he was forbidden to cross with his army. To cross it was treason. To stay was surrender. He chose. Alea iacta est, he is said to have declared. The die is cast. His legions crossed, and with that step, the Roman Republic was doomed. The civil war that followed was brutal. Caesar marched swiftly, driving Pompey and his allies before him. At Pharsalus in Greece, he crushed Pompey's forces in a decisive battle. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was murdered on the orders of Pharaoh Ptolemy III. When Caesar arrived and saw his rival's severed head, he is said to have wept, not for Pompey the enemy, but for Pompey the once great Roman who had been reduced to such an end. But Egypt gave Caesar more than sorrow. It gave him Cleopatra. The young queen, brilliant and ambitious, became his lover and ally. Their relationship shocked Rome, scandalized the Senate, and tied Caesar's destiny to the ancient throne of Egypt. Together they sailed the Nile, two rulers bound by ambition. From her, he took not just pleasure but vision. He began to see himself not as a mere Roman, but as something greater. Back in Rome, Caesar was unstoppable. He returned victorious, celebrated with triumphs that dazzled the people, and took control of the state. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar still echoed in ours today. He gave land to veterans, restructured debts, expanded citizenship, and centralized power. He was reshaping Rome not as a republic of squabbling senators, but as an empire under one man, himself. But ambition is a dangerous flame. The more it burns, the more it consumes. Caesar accepted honors that made him seem less like a consul and more like a king. He wore purple, the color of royalty. He sat on a golden chair. He had coins minted with his image. Rumors spread that he sought a crown, that he dreamed of being king of Rome. And to Romans, the word king was poison. They had overthrown kings centuries before, and they swore never to bow again. His enemies in the Senate began to whisper. They saw him as a tyrant in the making, a man who would destroy the Republic once and for all. Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar trusted, perhaps even loved like a son. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar walked into the Senate. He was surrounded by men he thought were allies, but knives flashed. They struck him again and again. 23 wounds carved his body, and when he saw Brutus among the assassins, the betrayal cut deeper than any blade. "Et tu, Brut?" he is said to have whispered. Then he fell at the base of Pompey's statue, the man he had once defeated. as if fate itself were mocking him. The Senate thought they had saved the Republic. They thought killing Caesar would restore balance. Instead, they unleashed chaos. Civil wars erupted once more. Caesar's heir, Octavian, would rise to power, and Rome would not return to the Republic. It would become an empire, ruled by emperors who took Caesar's name as their title. Caesar, Tsar, Kaiser. Julius Caesar had died, but his shadow ruled for centuries. His ambition reshaped Rome, and Rome reshaped the world. Even his killers could not erase him. His name became synonymous with power itself. So, was he a tyrant or a visionary? A dictator who killed the Republic? Or a genius who built the foundations of empire? Perhaps both. But one thing is certain, he was wanted. By his enemies, by his allies, by history itself. And as Rome's Republic died in a pool of Caesar's blood, far away in the icy lands of Russia, another figure would one day rise. He would crown himself with absolute power, rule through fear and madness, and even kill his own son in a fit of rage. They would call him Ivan the Terrible. He was born into a cradle of knives. Ivan came into the world in 1530, heir to the throne of Moscow. But from the moment he could walk, his life was a storm of betrayal, blood, and fear. His father, Grand Prince Vasily III, died when Ivan was only 3. His mother tried to protect him, but she too died mysteriously a few years later. Many believed poisoned by nobles who wanted to control the throne. So the boy who would become Tsar grew up not as a prince wrapped in silk, but as a prisoner in his own palace. Boyars, the powerful Russian nobles, ruled in his name, squabbling like vultures over power. They beat him, starved him, mocked him. At night, he read holy books by candlelight, dreaming of vengeance. By day, he watched his guardians kill one another, dogs fighting over bones. Imagine being a child and realizing the people who are supposed to protect you are waiting for you to die. That was Ivan's childhood. And from that poisoned soil, a monster began to grow. At 16, he was crowned as the first Tsar of all Russia. The boy who had once cowered in shadows now wore a crown that made him the chosen of God. The coronation was a spectacle. Golden robes, blazing candles, the church declaring him ruler by divine right. For the first time, Russia had a Tsar, not just a prince. Ivan wanted the world to know that his power was absolute. At first, he seemed almost enlightened. He reformed the law, modernized the army, built churches and fortresses. He even created a council to advise him, a gesture of cooperation. Russia expanded under his rule, swallowing Kazan and Astrakhan, pushing eastward towards Siberia. The young Tsar looked like a visionary who would transform his fractured land into an empire. But power does strange things to men who have only known fear. The boy who grew up abandoned never forgot the taste of betrayal, and in time, paranoia consumed him. When his beloved wife Anastasia died suddenly, Ivan became convinced the boyars had poisoned her. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. From that moment on, mercy died inside him. He unleashed terror. He created the Oprichniki, his own private army dressed in black, riding black horses, carrying severed dog heads and brooms as symbols of their mission, to sniff out traitors and sweep Russia clean. They became executioners, torturers, assassins. Entire towns were massacred. In Novgorod, even suspected treason, and unleashed a horror so great it is still remembered in whispers. Thousands were drowned in the Volkhov River, butchered in the streets, their corpses left for crows. The snow ran red for days. Ivan delighted in cruelty. He devised tortures himself, watching victims scream with a cold fascination. He trusted no one, not boyars, not generals, not even his own family. He saw enemies in every shadow, betrayal in every glance. He turned Russia into a land of fear where silence became survival. And then came the moment that would define him. In a fit of rage, during an argument with his eldest son and heir, Ivan struck him on the head with his staff. The blow was fatal. As his son lay bleeding, Ivan collapsed, weeping and screaming, clutching the dying body. The painting of that moment, Ivan the Terrible cradling his murdered son, his face twisted with grief and horror, remains one of the most haunting images in Russian history. He had destroyed his own future with his own hands. Ivan's reign became a cycle of blood and repentance. He would slaughter thousands, then retreat into churches, begging for forgiveness, only to repeat the cycle again. To some, he was God's chosen ruler, a holy man who carried Russia on his shoulders. To others, he was the very devil in a crown, a mad tyrant who drenched his land in blood. He expanded Russia's borders, laid the foundations of an empire that would endure for centuries. And yet he left his people broken, his court poisoned with fear, his dynasty fragile. When he finally died in 1584, playing a game of chess, Russia was exhausted, scarred, and leaderless. His legacy was a nation stronger in land but weaker in soul. So what was Ivan? A visionary builder? A paranoid madman? A tyrant or a czar chosen by God? The truth is that he was all of these at once. He was a child shaped by betrayal, a ruler forged in fear, and a man consumed by rage. His story is not simply about Russia. It is about what happens when power is given to someone who has only ever known cruelty. And while Russia mourned and cursed its terrible czar, in Europe another man would rise. A man who believed himself the heir to Rome, who crowned himself emperor, who bent nations to his will with genius and ambition. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born on an island at the edge of empires, Corsica, 1769. The French had just conquered it, and in that uncertain land, a small, restless boy entered the world. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was not born into wealth or into a throne. He was born into a modest family with fading nobility. His father a lawyer, his mother a stern woman of iron discipline. They spoke Italian at home, not French, and when young Napoleon was sent to France for his education, he was mocked for his accent, his rough manners, his strange name. He was an outsider. He never forgot it. But outsiders, when armed with ambition, become dangerous. Napoleon devoured books, especially those of history and war. He studied Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Hannibal. He memorized their strategies, their victories, their failures. He was not just learning, he was preparing. While other boys laughed and danced, Napoleon dreamed of battlefields. As a young officer of artillery, he proved himself in fire. At Toulon, during the Revolution, he devised a bold plan to drive out the British. Cannons thundered, and the enemy fell. A mere 24-year-old, he was promoted on the spot. In the chaos of revolution, talent rose faster than birth. Napoleon had found his chance. Paris took notice. Soon he was leading armies, not just cannons. In Italy, he transformed ragged soldiers into a force of lightning. He moved fast, struck hard, and dazzled Europe. His victories made him a hero. His proclamations, written in fiery language, made him a legend. His enemies called him a demon. His soldiers called him the Little Corporal, a term of affection for the man who marched with them, ate with them, shared their hardships. They loved him with a fanatic loyalty, but victory in Italy was only the beginning. He turned his eyes to Egypt, dreaming of cutting Britain's lifeline to India. The campaign was a mix of glory and disaster. He won battles, but disease and the British Navy cut his ambitions short. Still, even in failure, Napoleon spun victory. He returned to France not as a defeated general, but as a conqueror whose shadow loomed over the Directory, the fragile government of the time. In 1799, he seized power. The coup of 18 Brumaire ended the revolution's experiment with democracy. Napoleon was now first consul, but he was not content with titles. He was not content with sharing. In 1804, in a ceremony filled with splendor, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. The Pope was there, but Napoleon did not kneel. He took the crown in his own hands and placed it on his own head. The message was clear. He owed his power to no one but himself. Europe trembled. Coalitions of kings and emperors rose against him, but time and again he smashed them. At Austerlitz, he crushed the armies of Austria and Russia in a single day, a masterpiece of strategy still studied centuries later. At Jena, at Wagram, at Friedland, his eagle soared. His empire spread from Spain to Poland, from the Mediterranean to the North Sea. He created the Napoleonic Code, a system of laws that outlasted him, influencing nations long after his empire crumbled. He reshaped Europe not only with battles, but with ideas. But ambition has a way of pushing men past their limits. In Spain, guerrilla fighters bled his armies dry. In the East, he made the fatal mistake of all conquerors. He invaded Russia. In 1812, with over 500,000 men, he marched into the vastness. At first, victory seemed possible. He reached Moscow, but the city burned, leaving him nothing but ash. Winter came, hunger came, death came. By the time his army staggered back, fewer than 50,000 remained. The Grande Armée had been shattered, not by soldiers, but by snow and starvation. Europe rose against him. At Leipzig, at the Battle of Nations, his enemies crushed him. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon was forced to abdicate. They sent him to Elba, a small island, a cage for an eagle. But the eagle was not finished. In 1815, he escaped. He returned to France with a handful of men. At first, soldiers sent to arrest him surrounded him. He opened his coat and said, "If any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am." No one fired. They joined him. Village by village, regiment by regiment, France rose for him. In weeks, he was emperor again. The 100 Days had begun, but Europe was ready. At Waterloo, the British under Wellington and the Prussians under Blücher faced him. The battle was brutal, muddy, chaos itself. For hours, Napoleon's genius seemed ready to turn the tide. But fate and exhaustion had other plans. His army broke. The eagle finally fell. They did not give him another Elba. This time they sent him to St. Helena, a rock in the Atlantic, far from Europe, far from power, far from hope. There, surrounded by the sea, Napoleon spent his last years dictating his story, shaping his own legend. He spoke of destiny, of betrayal, of glory. He painted himself not as a tyrant, but as a man chosen by fate, misunderstood by kings, loved by soldiers. In 1821, he died. Some say it was stomach cancer, others whisper of poison. Whatever the truth, he died a prisoner but not forgotten. His enemies thought they had buried him on a lonely island, but his memory refused to die. His name became eternal. His code shaped laws. His battles shaped nations. His legend shaped ambition itself. Even today, the word Napoleon does not mean just a man. It means drive. It means conquest. It means the fire of someone who refuses to be ordinary. Like Caesar, like Genghis, like Attila, like Ivan, he was one of the most wanted. Not by a court or a king, but by history itself. And so, from a small boy mocked for his accent on a forgotten island, he became the man who crowned himself, who shook the world, who dreamed of empire. He was Napoleon Bonaparte, emperor, conqueror, exile, legend. We've walked through centuries tonight, side by side with men whose names still burn like fire in the memory of history. From the windswept steppes where Genghis Khan forged an empire from nothing but hunger and will, to the blood-soaked plains where Attila thundered against Rome, to the marble halls of the Senate where Caesar fell under daggers, to the frozen courts of Moscow where Ivan ruled with terror, to the battlefields of Europe where Napoleon crowned himself emperor. These were not ordinary men. They were storms. They were the most wanted people of their time. But pause for a moment. What does most wanted really mean? In their age, it meant kings declared them enemies. Priests damned them from pulpits. Armies marched against them. Yet here we are, centuries later, still speaking their names. If history truly wanted to erase them, it failed. Why? Because power, once seized, leaves scars too deep to fade. Each of them came from different worlds, different centuries, different languages, yet look closely and you'll see the same pattern. They all began in struggle, abandoned, mocked, hunted, underestimated. Genghis, the starving boy cast out by his clan. Attila, the outsider who looked more barbarian than man. Caesar, the indebted young noble, nearly executed before his career began. Ivan, the orphan child, abused and humiliated by those meant to protect him. Napoleon, the Corsican mocked for his accent. Treated as a foreigner in his own empire, every single one of them carried wounds. And those wounds became weapons. They learned that mercy would not save them. They learned that if they wanted to survive, they had to bend the world, crush it, force it to remember their names. Weakness in their eyes was death. And so they chose power. Not soft, not noble, not kind, but power taken in blood. And here's the darker truth. It worked. They won. They carved their place into history not by kindness, but by fire. Genghis's empire stretched across continents. Attila made emperors pay tribute. Caesar's name became the very word for ruler. Ivan shaped Russia into an empire of fear. Napoleon rewrote the map of Europe. They all seized what they were told they could not have, and for that, they became unforgettable. But it came with a price. Look at their endings. Genghis died in mystery, buried in secret, his grave hidden by murder. Attila choked on his wedding night, gone in the middle of celebration. Caesar, stabbed 23 times by men he called allies, even, weeping over the body of his son he had killed himself. Napoleon, exiled to a lonely rock, dictating his story to the waves. Every one of them conquered the world in their own way, but not one of them conquered themselves. Their empires rose, their enemies fell, but inside, the storms that drove them never rested. In the end, power devoured them all, and yet, we still admire them, don't we? We read their stories, we film them, we argue about them, we measure ourselves against them. Why? Because deep down, we know that history is not written by the meek. It is written by those willing to seize it, no matter the cost. That is the hidden reality tying all of this together. Power does not come clean. It comes with blood. So as you sit here, centuries removed, ask yourself, what would you have done in their place? Would you have taken mercy and been forgotten? Or would you have taken power and been remembered forever, even as a monster? That is the uncomfortable question history leaves us with. And before we close tonight, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, who among them was the greatest? Who truly deserved to be called the most wanted? Was it the starving boy who became a storm? The barbarian who shook Rome? The Roman who crowned himself dictator? The Tsar who drowned his land in fear? Or the emperor who turned ambition into legend? History does not give us easy answers. It only gives us echoes. And tonight, you've heard them. The names are carved, the stories are told, and now they live again in you.